Thank you everyone for joining in today's webinar. We welcome you to the third episode of our webinar series brought to you by ATA Hospitality Finance Consultants. We are currently live from Dubai with a very learned panel of experts who will talk us through today's topic, sustainability, sustainable finance, and ESG reporting. The webinar will last for 1 hour and it will end at 5 p.m. UAE time. A little bit about myself. I'm Rabia Shaukat and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. I'm the founder and managing director of ATA Hospitality Finance Consultants. ATA is a full-service niche financial consultancy firm that provides bespoke financial advisory services across the hospitality and tourism sector. We work with owners and operators of hotels and residences, food and beverage sector, travel and tourism, as well as recreation adventure concepts. Our areas of specialization are corporate and hospitality finance, asset management and owner rep services, hospitality advisory, pre-opening services, and learning and development. I would now like to request our panelists to give a brief introduction about themselves and their company. In the order of left to right, we'll start with Iftikhar Hamdani.
Thank you, Rabia, for taking me into this panel discussion. Well, sustainability is my passion, so I'm very much excited to be part of your panel. I'm working as an area general manager for hospitality management holding, and I'm running as an area GM for Bahijwan Palace Hotel, which is a 5-star property directly on the beach, and then Coral Beach Resort Sharjah, which is a 4-star beach resort. So I'm in this area for last 22 years, but actually exactly for last 12 years, I'm very much passionate in sustainability and very much eager to learn new things, new technologies, new techniques into sustainability. And we did actually many changes, in our daily operation. I think that so many people they don't understand that once being a hospitality in the hospitality industry, we can make a lot of things in our daily operation, and that's what actually we are the pioneer in waste management in the Northern Emirates. Introduced actually the first compost machine in the Middle East. And then along with that, actually, we built a very strong green team and a very profitable business also. So I'm proud that, that for last 12 years, we bring a lot of changes, and then within the discussion, I will explore a few more, Thank you very much, Ravi.
Brilliant, thank you, Iftikhar. We'd like to go with Damien next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Damien Regan. I'm based in Dubai, and I've been here not as long as Iftikhar, but I've been here 5 years in region, and prior to that, 20 years in London, working with an accountancy firm. My role here is as the sustainability reporting and assurance leader across the Middle East. So I work in all the key countries within the Middle East, very frequently, unfortunately contributing carbon emissions through my flights across the region, but nevertheless helping clients themselves identify their sustainability goals, their needs, and their reporting and therefore assurance within. I'm actually working with a hotel group at the moment. I'm in Qatar, which is a fascinating piece of work, understanding how the hotel industry works, the different relationships between the owner of the buildings, the operators themselves, and actually the challenges that they actually have in terms of meeting sustainability goals when they're running those operations. So a fascinating topic, and delighted to be here today. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Damon. Last but not the least, Radhika.
Thank you so much, Rabia, for having me on the panel, and it's delighted to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Radhika. I'm like Damien and Iftikhar. I'm based in Dubai. Sorry, not Iftikhar. You're from the Northern Emirates.
Yes.
True. So I'm very much based in Dubai, and my experience has been in hospitality. Previously, I worked with Intercontinental Hotels Group in the corporate office here in Dubai office and in the UK office. And coming from there, I've now flipped, and I now have my own consultancy and also sustainability kiosk. Now, sustainability kiosk is a local entrepreneurship. We've literally had a soft launch 2 days ago. So it's a new baby that we've launched. And what does that do is to help buyers and sellers get connected on sustainable solutions. And the reason for doing this was awareness, and sometimes just having the knowledge in terms of what solutions are available in a local market is quite a tough game. So we verify solutions and then we list them as a service, as a platform for sustainability. So at the back of it, I also consult on sustainability to hotels in UAE, and we're actively consulting with some of the hotel chains, and that's where all our knowledge and our experiences come from. So that's me in a nutshell, and through the presentation, we'll have a lot more case studies so we can get to details in terms of our work.
Brilliant. Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Radhika, and good luck. Good luck with your launch. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Thank you, Rabi. I'm very nervous. Thank you.
All right. So before we start the panel discussion, I'd like to give you a bit of a background for today's topic and really what is the history of sustainability. So in 1994, United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change was adopted, which is a multilateral international treaty among 198 countries. The objective of this treaty was to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions and its concentrations in the atmosphere to bring it down to a sustainable level. Later in 1997, a Kyoto Protocol was adopted, which operationalized or implemented the United Nations framework. And for the first time, it made it legally binding on the part of countries involved and set the limits and reductions for these countries. Fast forward in 2015, in United Nations General Assembly, 2030 agenda was introduced, whereby 17 sustainability development goals were announced. The objective of these SDGs was to set the world on a path of sustainable development. And the intention is to achieve these objectives by the end of 2030. Later in December 2015, in the same year, Paris Agreement was done to continue the climate change protection process beyond 2020. And the objective of this agreement was to reduce the global warming and keep it below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably down to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to 2010 levels. Now, this agreement superseded the previous Kyoto Protocol, which was applicable until 2020. Now, United Nations regularly holds climate change conferences every year, which are more commonly called as the Conference of the Parties, or COP. Every year in the COPs, nations join together to discuss and agree the measures to tackle climate change. This year in 2022, 27th conference, that is COP27, will be held in Egypt, whereas next year in 2023, COP28 will be held in UAE, in Dubai Expo City, which is of course a great news for the Middle Eastern region. Now, with the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, the target for 2030 is to reduce or cut the GHG emissions by 45% and bringing it down to finally net zero at the end of 2050. Now, with all this happening in the field of sustainability, one might wonder what sustainability really is. Sustainability is a global or rather broad goal which aims to make humans coexist on the planet Earth for a long period of time. It is commonly described as across the lines of 3 pillars or 3 dimensions, so to say. These are the social pillar, the environmental pillar, and the economic pillar. Currently, due to the ongoing global warming and climate change challenges, environmental pillar is considered to be the most important pillar of sustainability. Therefore, in everyday usage, when you hear the word sustainability, it is often more focused on its environmental aspect, and it's synonymously used as to be addressing the environmental issues. Now, with regard to sustainability, companies might be required to do ESG reporting, which is essentially the disclosure of all the data related to companies' operations across the areas of environmental, social, and governance. Now, ESG reporting really gives you a brief snapshot about the impact of companies' operations or its business on all these three areas. And it helps the investors to make decisions by avoiding those companies that might pose a financial risk due to its practices in these three areas. Now, zooming into the hospitality industry, which is one of the world's fastest growing industry and currently accounts for 10% of the global GDP, what would sustainability really mean for it? In 2018 alone, almost 1.4 billion international tourist arrivals were recorded, which are expected to be increased by 1.8 billion by 2030. Certainly, with such a large number, responsible tourism or sustainable hospitality is going to be a combined or collective effort, which means that each and every player in the tourism industry has to take responsibility and play its part in ensuring the travel is sustainable. We've already seen in case of Google and Booking.com, who have now introduced eco-certification and travel sustainable properties as one of the filter criteria for consumers to choose from when they make their hotel booking. Which means not only that more and more consumers will now be considering sustainable properties before their hotel booking, but it also means that more and more consumers are becoming aware of sustainability practices adopted by the hotel now that the information has become much more transparent. So in today's webinar, we will be advancing this discussion and asking questions with our panelists to further understand what are the current issues and trends around the current topic. Starting off with, first of all, understanding in a simplified manner as to what are sustainability and net zero commitments. Then what is the relevance of sustainability for the accounting and finance community in relation to ESG reporting? More likely than not, this area might require some investment. So we'll then understand with our panelists as to what is sustainable finance and how ESG can be incorporated into the investment strategy. What are the current guidelines for ESG reporting? And finally, we'll see some of the use cases in the hospitality industry as to what sustainability initiatives have been so far taken by hospitality companies across the globe. Last but not the least, we'll have a Q&A session with our participants. So in case you have any question around the topic or the discussion we will have, just pop up your question in the chat box, which I will go through towards the end of the webinar with our panelists. So with this background and the notion, let's start our panel discussion. Starting off with Radhika, can you just explain us in very simple and layman terms as to what are sustainability and net zero commitments?
Thank you, Rabia. Like you said, layman terms, I lay it out simply. Sustainability is simply fulfilling the needs of current generations without compromising the needs of future generations, while ensuring the balance between economic growth, environmental care, and social well-being. So that's how the ESG comes together. So, you know, I do podcasting too. And when I was speaking to this gentleman who actually wrote this textbook called Sustainability, I don't know, oh God, I'm on a different screen. You can't see, I'm holding a book. It's called Sustainability in the Hospitality Industry. I'll put the link when Rabia sends the link out. But he said a very good point. He said, sustainability is about asking ourselves, are we being good ancestors? So I think it's all about the balance between what this generation can do to fulfill your needs without compromising the future generations. Rabia, is that layman terms?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I like that when you say, are we being good ancestors? I mean, that's a very important key message. But then can you also shed some light as to what are net zero commitments?
Yeah, I think net zero commitments, like you mentioned brilliantly, I think it was nice to see that from your end in terms of how it all started and demystifying what the protocols are and what the Paris Agreement is. So net zero commitment, from where Rabia started, is actually about cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. And if there's any emissions, they need to be reabsorbed through atmosphere or the oceans or the forest. And that's what is net zero commitment about. And we in hospitality are very lucky because we actually have a guidebook and we have an entire Sustainable Hospitality Alliance who's actually put together a thought process in terms of how is it possible for hospitality? So, just going back to in terms of what commitments is needed, if there are any sustainability passionists or sustainability managers out here with the intention of how do I set a target for my team, I would seriously advise you to go look at Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, and they would really help you with how do you commence planning for it, for a commitment? How do you set up a baseline? And how do you put boundaries for emissions? Because very quickly you could be drawn into commitments in terms of what is scope 1, scope 2, whereas this document clearly explains the boundaries in terms of how do you deal with various categories in establishing a net zero target and commitment for your organization. And as Rabia said, we are all aiming for net zero 2050 as hospitality, and how to get to that is what this document will help you. And it will also help you how to set goals for the wider chain of tourism, because we as an industry have a lot of linkages with all of other sectors around us, and this will help you to do that linkages too.
All right, brilliant. So with that note, coming to you, Iftikhar, are we being good ancestors in the hospitality industry? What is really the role of hospitality industry in sustainability?
Yes, Rabia, I think that hospitality industry, we have a bigger role. In my opinion, that we can do a lot in a hospitality industry, and practically we have already proven in the Northern Emirates. But it's all about the mindset, actually, that once you really accept that you can do on your part in the hospitality industry, you can do a lot. Like, for example, we contribute a lot of waste from the hospitality industry. I mean, especially in the food part. Overall, the waste part, then the energy conservation, we can also, do a lot of things. But unless if we are not really building a green team, you cannot achieve all these goals actually. But on energy conservation or a waste management, we can play a vital role, and that will ultimately actually, reduce the carbon emission. Being in a hospitality industry, we are dealing with so many suppliers, we are dealing with the different nationalities in the guest, so we can engage guest. As Radhika is here and she worked in IHG, so one time I was in one of the hotel, and how they have engaged me in St. Petersburg, because they were offering me, because I was the IHG member, the loyalty member, and they gave me extra point that if I will involve myself and not to change the linen. So there is a lot of way to involve actually guests. There is a lot of way to involve actually staff, and all of us, like being a guest involvement and then the staff involvement, we can do a major role, And the third, that because so many suppliers are involved, because we are getting a lot of suppliers in the hotel, So if we can practically, put ourselves in front of them and then get them in also. So as a bigger role, staff and then guests and then the suppliers, we can bring a lot of changes actually in hospitality industry. To tell you the truth, we took this initiative when I started, in Green Initiative. We diverted 90% of waste from the landfill by introducing the first compost machine in Ajman. We had actually the lot of diversion from the used cooking oil. So we were actually converting this used cooking oil into biodiesel. So how it happened actually, because we accept that we can do it. So first of all, it's very important that you need to have this acceptability, that you need to make a change. And secondly, there are two ways, that one is a commercial objective and the other is a responsibility. So as you know that we are in a business and we need to get a profitability, So once you understand that you can make the difference by achieving the more profit, by reducing your expenses, you can get increase in your GOP. So that is a commercial objective, because by reducing your energy conservation, by reducing your waste, the amount what we were paying actually to waste companies, that was reduced also. The cooking oil which was diverted into biodiesel, we were using actually that diesel for our catering trucks also. So all those things actually make your profitability increase. So in my opinion, the commercial objective and then the responsibility, both hand in hand can make a big difference. So that's why hospitality industry can make a big role in overall, reducing the carbon emission.
Certainly, and I really like the idea where you said that guests were rewarded for reusing the linen or not changing the lean, and so that's like a collective effort or a win-win scenario I was referring to earlier. So with this note, Damien, what do you think? What is the relevance of sustainability for the accounting and finance community, not only in relation to ESG, but generally with regard to sustainability?
Yeah, very good question. I think the first question is, this question will be broken into two parts really. One is, what does sustainable reporting mean for businesses? Because at the moment, businesses are collecting non-financial information, sustainability information on emissions or water and waste or diversity by people in the organization that are not necessarily financially or accounting aware. So they are people in HR or procurement or elsewhere in the organization collecting this sort of information and then effectively passing it through to someone else to then possibly publish. Now, this non-financial information doesn't really go through the same rigor that, let's say, a financial piece of information, invoices, receipts, valuations, that goes through a normal financing team. So companies coming to sustainability reporting probably for the first time are using a network of people to collect data that aren't really trained in collecting information of this nature. And that's the first sort of challenge. So what usually happens is companies start bringing in people with certain skill sets, and that tends to be the accounting or the finance teams within the business. Indeed, a lot of the invoices that effectively help us understand emissions or invoices, water and waste being paid, etc., are actually in the finance department anyway. So it's an easy sort of jump through. So I think as a company starts to mature in terms of how it's collecting information and how it's then reporting it externally, we see a shift in the people collecting it into the finance teams. That's one observation. So the finance teams that are currently in businesses processing invoices, receipts, and possibly also those who are preparing the financial accounts of the business have this new challenge. They've got all this new information coming in that they're expected to come up with some calculations, some methodologies, some reporting. And for many of them, it's actually quite new. So the industry itself, and I'm talking here more of the accounting industry, is starting to think, well, how do we train people to collect good data on environmental issues such as pollution, water waste, emissions? How do we start putting proper methodologies in place that are consistent across industries, etc.? So I think there's a bit of a revolution coming for these very traditional industries of financing in order to take an understanding of the new types of data coming through and the new reporting. And that has a knock-on effect for the actual reporting itself. It's also got a knock-on for the other community that's involved here, which are the auditors. So companies like ourselves who go into companies to do audits. Now, the target companies that are preparing the financials are already being impacted by the environment in terms of the loans, their liabilities, the balance sheet issues, etc. So all of these are actually already being incorporated or should be incorporated within the standard audit. But increasingly, you've got more requirements to start disclosing information of this nature, non-financial information, and actually explaining what the emissions are for the company, what the targets are, and how we will achieve those. So those individuals are starting to think beyond the audit and actually how to help companies disclose this sort of information. And that leads to standalone sustainability reports or information starting to be included. So as I said, it's a changing environment very much for those professions that are actually collating data, testing data, and providing the audit services around it.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for the detailed explanation about the role of the accounting and finance community. Certainly a lot needs to be done, especially this area is relatively new to most of us. Coming back to Radhika, as I mentioned in the beginning, with the Agenda 2030, we have 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, to achieve by 2030, which seems like a lot at the first place. How would businesses prioritize, or they're meant to prioritize these SDGs? Which are more important than the other, and what would rather be your top 5 ESG goals or SDGs for the hospitality industry?
I'm going to say it's a very good question, because this is a vast industry and it's hard to pick on what's the favorite or the top. I'll give you the top 3, Rabia, in terms of what I think we should prioritize on. And picking up on what Mr. Iftikhar said, look, sustainability in operations is a big deal, and we can do a lot as hotels here. And I think that's what I would focus on. So sustainable operations, because we need to decarbonize the industry. And the target is to decarbonize our operations, like I said, by 2050. And if you think 2050 is far, it's actually not far. You'd be surprised how long it takes for operations to move. And with Iftikhar's examples, I can see the smile on his face. And you know that, when we work with hotels, you think of, a waste target, like even think of doing something of, I want to have a waste target of 90%. It actually takes months of exercise and sometimes years to get that number. And that's just with one metric of waste. So I would say start with the first one, which is operations, having a green team, trying to see what can you do with the science-based targets of measuring it and seeing the impact. So you have to prove that you've made an impact. So that's with operations. The second one, I would say, again, this is taking the niche segment of solid waste. It's only because we haven't done much in there. And when you talk about mitigation of solid waste, I would focus more so on food waste, because food waste is so important for SDG goals. There's so many hungry people, there are malnourished people, there's not enough resources that's being distributed around the world. And we still have huge amount of food waste coming out from the hospitality industry. So is that something as a challenge that we could take on? I mean, luckily in UAE, there's so many, the ecosystem is ripe. We do have the composters of the world right available at the doorstep. We do have so many solutions. UAE Food Bank, for example, helps in redistributing the food. We do have NEMA as a pledge from UAE government, which is all about, as a federal entity, they want hospitality to commit to the change. So I think the framework exists. It's up to hospitality to work within the framework and actually be part of the change. And third one I would ask is, again, looking at hospitality and how we make 10% of GDP, like you've said, it's almost our obligation that we have towards employees and communities, because we need to be providing the equitable conditions for employment and also economic leakages. Now, economic leakages in accounting, I think is a very big term. And as Damien said, it's the new challenges of how do you report all of these things. And I think going forward, you might hear a lot about economic leakages. Economic leakages is simply, to give you a contextual example, it's me going to a third world country and asking for a Coke. It's much better if I drank a local drink and then the money would be absorbed into the local economy. Whereas if I asked for a Coke, the money is again leaked back into global international corporations and doesn't necessarily go into the local economy. And I think that's where we could focus a lot more in terms of how do we develop the infrastructure. So there are beautiful destinations out there, and tourism plays a great role in developing these destinations. But in making sure you as a consumer, you as a hotelier are very conscious in what you do with your choices and in how you operate. I think I've said a lot. So are these three good enough in terms of frameworks for people on the call, people outside to focus on?
That's a great starting point to build a conversation in terms of the SDG goals. Now, what Iftikhar said earlier, that in terms of the sustainability initiative that were adopted in his property, he has seen improvement in profitability and cost savings, etc. And now what we hear from you, Radhika, the infrastructure might be required to further promote sustainability. So with that, I would come to you, Damien. Certainly, it's clear that some form of investment would be required for sustainability. But first of all, what is sustainable finance and investing, and how the agenda of ESG could be incorporated into the investment strategy for businesses?
Yeah, certainly. So the point you make about finance being important is absolutely right. I don't think we can achieve our net zero goals without significant investment to help companies, but also significant investment going into new IT, new development, new technologies to be able to clean water waste, reduce emissions, etc. So finance is key to everything. So where you have an opportunity for banks or investors to invest in green, increasingly that's becoming a preference. Indeed, some of the mandates in very mature markets, let's say in Europe and America, are actually trying to focus money specifically on the pension funds mandates to what are called sustainable or green finance. So they are looking for opportunities to invest. In other parts of the world, the government is driving a lot of investment as well. And again, looking at certain projects, certain companies, is exactly what they're trying to do. Now, facilitating this, and let's call it the green dollar, for instance, the investment coming in, to help facilitate that, certain companies have actually, certain banks and companies have actually created products that make it relatively easy for companies to invest. So here I'm thinking about green bonds or green loans. So the concept of a green bond is that a corporate would effectively raise finance through a bond, but calling it a green bond because the project in which the money will be spent is something which will benefit the environment. So it could be something to do with energy efficiency or transport change or waste reuse. So the whole purpose of the green bond is to direct capital effectively to those sort of projects. Now, banks can actually do this. They can raise green bonds themselves and actually put that money into projects which they identify as well. I think the very first green bond was back in 2007 with the European Investment Bank indeed. So it's been around a while, but over the last few years, it's really grown as those mandates that I mentioned have started channeling green dollars towards these sort of projects. And it's evolved as well. So you can now get green loans from banks to put to certain projects. And there's a sustainability linked loan, which is effectively loans being created for businesses where they're not looking specific at the actual target project, but at the business itself. How is the business achieving certain ESG KPIs and goals? And the rate that you pay back depends on whether you've achieved those goals over a period or not. So I think there's a wide variety of capital instruments out there. There's a wide variety of lenders seeking to invest those green dollars. So it's an opportunity, I think, for companies that are looking for finance, for investment, to start building, as you say, into their approach, to understand what can they reach out, how can they vary the way that they repay money, the interest, etc., to certain goals, not necessarily financial goals, but actually ESG linked goals. So I think it's a very, very important method, a very important way of communicating with the investor and banks through sustainable finance, and that's the purpose of it, and that's what we're seeing growing increasingly in the Middle East particularly, but in more mature markets they're much further ahead.
Great. So it looks like we do have quite a few options available to access finance for different sustainability initiatives. But if sustainability for businesses was to be funded directly from equity or by the investors or the shareholders themselves, can you tell us how do you then make a business case for sustainability? How do you really convince the investors who might require some convincing for sustainability as to why that is important, and how do you then make a business case for it?
Yeah, Rabi, the same as I mentioned earlier, the investors, owners, they are always looking at the commercial point of view. So you have to show them the ROI. You need to tell them about the pay period, because they are business people. They have commercial, minds. So you need to give back the answer also commercially. And in my opinion, all these sustainable actions, whatever I did practically in my life, there is always benefit actually for the owners, directly or indirectly. Like, for example, this first compost machine establishing in my previous hotel, there was a payback actually. The reason, because within 8 months time, we were able to get benefit for that year, but not only for that year, but in future, we got actually a free, because we were not paying any more to the 90% of our waste to the waste collector. And this is on a small level. But on an energy conservation point of view, I mean, when you are really saving money, you can definitely convince to the investor or the business people. I mean, in my workforce, I mean, where the turnover of staff was 65% because they were not really happy. I actually give human sustainability by keeping them happy, creating a lot of activities for them, or that team was so happy that the 65% turnover turned into 2%, and then 170 staff actually strength went into 600. So growth of the property was like one property to another property to third property, but actually people were happy. So keeping this human sustainability, that people, they were really happy in the property, and that become really a case study, because investor or the owner was so happy that he was willing to invest more into next property, then into next property, and then still he's continuing to get actually more property. But energy conservation point of view, the new techniques or technologies, when he was convinced, then he has adopted to the new properties also. Like, for example, in the existing owners, I identified that the efficiency of the cooling was really not good, and we have to change the cooling tower. I mean, first question was that how we will get the ROI, or when will be the payback period. We did the study, and then within this period, we have changed. I have the new cooling tower installed now, and I will be starting getting benefit. But unless I did not convince owner that how I will be getting return, he was not able to take this initiative. But now, I mean, in 3-4 days time, I will be having actually commissioning of that cooling tower. I have done actually a new boiler also, because all those things, unless I will not convince to the owner with the return, it was impossible. You need to have this power to convince actually the owner with a business case study. And that's what, I'm carrying, and then I'm discussing with those good properties. Just like I give example of Radhika's property. And not only in one hotel, I have seen this practically all over the world, because I am the loyalty member. So whenever I go, I actually learn, and I come back and I adopt actually in my property. And I convince my owner that I have seen practically it's really successful in Radhika place, and why it cannot be over here in the Northern Emirates. So this is actually all dependent how you convince with a payback period, and then it is very much possible that the owner will be convinced, because at the end it is their benefit actually.
Right, but I still feel in case of, environmental aspect of sustainability, or where you talk about energy conservation projects, it might still be easier because you could clearly see that in the form of numbers, right, in terms of what the payback is. But what about other qualitative factors, or let's say other sustainability aspects like gender diversity, biodiversity, where companies have replaced plastic by paper? All of this might seem as additional cost to the owners or the investors. How do you make a business case in those cases where you cannot clearly see the benefit in numbers over the long period of time?
I mean, we are looking at Dubai, I mean, when Dubai is investing in infrastructure, I mean, good roads. Do you think that we can see that what Sheikh Mohammed is getting direct profit from that road? Because so many things are actually linked with the indirect, I mean, not only the direct you have to get. So as I mentioned, that human sustainability part, and there was 65% turnover, and now staff satisfaction is so good that they are happy. That hotel has the highest profit in the Northern Emirates. And now they are continuing actually this success story. So, that not necessarily that directly you are getting actually benefit, because one is that they saved money not to invest actually on the cancellation of visa and then issuing the new visa. One was that is a direct benefit. But on top of it, that has become one of the best team. I mean, they are best in service excellence. So, I mean, those are the benefits sometimes that not directly you are getting, but overall it is really impacting actually on your profitability, and that's what you need to convince actually to the owner.
Right, got that. So coming to you, Damien, what guidelines do we have available for ESG reporting right now? And is ESG reporting currently just optional, or is it mandatory for companies?
Okay, so the answer to that is really where are you based? In which country? Are you listed or non-listed? So all of that drive the requirements. So if we start here in, let's say, the UAE, in the UAE, if you're a listed company, then there's a requirement under the local companies laws, effectively, in your corporate governance statement, to produce an annual sustainability report following GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. So listed companies here need to start doing a formal form of reporting. If you're non-listed, then it doesn't matter as much. There's no requirement to do so. So you can create an ad hoc ESG report, and that could be just whatever you wish to actually put out there about the numbers, your objectives, etc. on your website, or it could be even more formal. So it sort of depends where you are. If you're based in the UK, there are corporate governance requirements, company law requirements for certain disclosures, and increasingly something called TCFD, effectively a form of reporting that requires you to put information actually in the financials rather than a standalone report itself. If you're in Europe, you're facing mandatory reporting already, again, if you're listed. So it depends on where you sit and where you are. There are some companies let's say in Qatar or Oman or Kuwait and Bahrain here in the Middle East, that don't have a reporting requirement, but one would look to the stock exchange, and the stock exchange lists out maybe 30 KPIs that are recommended for the area. So it really depends who you are, where you are, and what's required of you. It usually stipulates an international standard, let's say like GRI or TCFD, or it just stipulates some recommended reporting. And that's where we are at the moment. It isn't mandatory globally for all sorts of companies.
So for UAE, did we say it's mandatory for listed companies?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So with that said, Radhika, could you tell us what would then ESG reporting mean for the hospitality industry in reference to the use cases that you would have already seen in the hospitality projects that you're currently working for? And have you seen any hospitality companies that do ESG reporting?
A very good question, actually, and I think it's an open question for everyone. This seems like such a topic that is still in a gray area. Like, we do have like the big hotel chains, of course, the major hotel companies, everyone's reporting it. Like if you take, IHGs, like Iftikhar said, the Marriott's, the Accors of the world, the Hiltons, to name a few, everyone's reporting ESG. And it's what's required because shareholders are asking for it. And without an ESG, you would become obsolete. And I think as asset value managers, people are looking at ESG. And like Damien said, the green bonds, all of the investments are happening based on ESG. And people realize that if you're not net zero by 2050, as a property, you would become obsolete. And as asset owner, you would start working almost reverse engineering all your tasks to say, how do I make my asset ready to actually be up to the challenge? So in that ways, I think overall it's happening. But if you ask me what's happening at individual balance sheet, individual hotel level, probably it's not as much as what we would expect, is my take on it. But I'm really willing to hear any mixed opinions or other opinions on the panel here.
Perhaps, Sakhar, you can add to it. What would ESG reporting mean for the hospitality industry, and if you've seen any of the companies reporting on ESG?
Yeah, I think that I worked in Wyndham, so I mean that was very beneficial because it comes from the Wyndham head office from US, and it is essential, for the hotels to give this ESG reporting. I think that I fully agree with Radhika. I think it's really very, very important in the hospitality industry, and then the rest of the hotel chain, they should adopt actually, because that is really a benefit. Because unless you will not have a proper reporting, you cannot really get the benefit. Same like that we did actually some certification like in a hospitality industry, and you have a lot of learning. So the people who are really not involved fully like in ESG reporting, they start actually on a certification basis, just like a Green Key, or even on a bigger level on a Green Globe certification also. So I think it's important for hospitality industry.
Yeah,
right.
And it's a great differentiator, right? So when you're looking at, sorry, Rabia, did you have a question?
No, it's all right. Go on, Radhika.
Now, I was saying, we talk about environmental, and there's science-based targets for environmental. And it's about each individual property when it comes cascaded down if you're part of a global chain, or if you're not part of the global chains. It's about adapting these science-based targets for your property, which will help you on the environmental sides. But also on hospitality has an obligation towards hospitality education. And I think education should be on the forefront to future-proof the industry. Good financing is all about future-proofing the industry. So I think I did ask at the start of the conversation saying, are we being good ancestors? To the finance people out there, I would ask, are you future-proofing your hotel? Are you future-proofing the industry? And that's where sustainability helps you. Because sustainability helps you get ready for future-proofing your environmental aspect, education. You're ready to build up the workforce who is actually talented, skilled, and available to do all of the tasks that you want, from finance to what's required. And also, I think the key thing, the third one, which is very close to my heart, which is the global gender gap. And I think as a woman at the table that I'm sitting on now, I wouldn't complete a sustainability topic without completing about the global gender gap. And when Time did a study of 150 countries looking at what is the global gender gap, I was really astonished to see that to close the global gender gap, it would take about 136 years. And I think we would only close it in 2288. So it's that wide a gap that exists. And when you look at these numbers, you actually realize that you're sitting in a country where there's actually good parity. But if you look elsewhere, if you look around us, maybe there is a huge thing that we can do when we address this issue collectively.
Right, brilliant. I mean, and actually that was my next question to you, Radhika, that often we talk about sustainability, it's all around environmentalism and the environmental aspect to it. How important are the non-environmental pillars of sustainability, like the gender diversity that you talked about? And then of course there are other aspects to it as well, like inclusion, equity, etc. What is your take on that?
Oh, sorry, I just jumped the question there. I think I read your mind there. So I think, yeah, I would say education as well, and the gender gap that we need to close, because when we start up actually in hospitality, we do have a lot of women workforce, like I said. 50% of the women workforce is probably women. We agree that at that level, we do have it. But as you move up the ranks, the glass ceiling, does it exist? It does. And I think that's where we need to focus on, like, as we move up the ranks, as we look at actually, how is it when we go from the 50%, again, 33%, 32% is where is at senior management. And when you go further up to CEO level, it's only at 8%. So 8% of the workforce, and I quote this from I did a podcast with a lady called Aradhana, and I quoted from her podcast. I can share more work from there. And it's just amazing that we start at 50%, and very quickly as we go up the ladder, it's down to 8%. And I think that's got to do a lot with how we look at this collectively as an industry. So to summarize, that's education, inclusivity. Are our hotels ready to be inclusive? Are we inclusive for all shapes and forms? And the third one being gender gap.
Right, and just I think that the same question pops into my mind again, that in such cases where you cannot clearly see the benefit in numbers, how do you make a business case for the investors, owners? How do you convince them?
I think I would look, like I said, reverse engineer everything. Like, if my asset, when you have ESG reporting, look for the global chains, it's all about the methodology that we have. And hospitality industry is a complex place because we have managed hotels, we have franchised hotels, we have co-managed hotels. It really depends on which segment you fit in. Okay, it depends on ownership. And that's why I always believe the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance has the guidelines to get you in terms of how do you prove your case study? How do you get the ROI across? And so many times it's just because you have to align with the global standards. And that's probably the biggest case study we have when it comes to individual hotel operated.
All right, brilliant. So we have some guidelines available in there. That's a good point for us to refer to after this webinar in case of, finding out how we can do the ROI calculations and make the business case for different sustainability projects. So now, coming back to you, Iftikhar, so this is the time for the budgeting season for most companies. So what would be your take or final words on how can companies, or let's say hospitality industry in general, incorporate the agenda of sustainability into its budgeting for this year?
Yeah, I mean, especially, it comes to the capital expenditure, so when you really want to do certain changes, like for example, I always try to do something different, like in Sharjah, I wanted to make a difference just to make a plastic-free hotel, so there will be no plastic at all. So that was kind of dream, but when I calculated, actually, it's not a dream anymore because I have seen few hotels, in the way which are already, they established the system. So as a matter of fact, whatever we are spending now on monthly basis on plastic bottles, which are a larger scale, for the staff and for the guests also. The plant which is on lease basis, that is even cheaper what I'm paying now, So capital expenditure point of view, I'm just giving priority that on a sustainability part, what exactly I can make the difference on responsibility responsibility point of view and a commercial point of view also. So when we made a commercial, analysis along with the finance, actually it's a benefit, So that's why I'm keeping the in Coral Beach Resort Sharjah to make it a plastic free and to have actually that unit, as a capital expenditure. Secondly, I mean, so many areas where there are really efficiency is really low in HVAC, especially chiller. So I am implanting now, because not necessarily in 1 year time, but over the years, I have a good payback actually. So I'm making actually those changes, because my property is a 45 years old Coral Beach Resort Sharjah, and there are many areas where really you need to invest actually. So I think capital expenditure is very important at this moment when we are making a budget. And in this budget period, I mean, you have to include those areas to improve efficiency in HVAC also, and such kind of project, just like making hotel plastic free. It will be really, I think, good start in Northern Emirates, just like we did actually the compost machine, and then so many hotels, they adopted not only to Northern Emirates, even in Dubai also. So we did maybe 13 years back. So similar kind of projects are really very important that we need to include in our budget.
Right, brilliant. With this, I think we will almost conclude our webinar. My last question to you, Damien, what do you think businesses need to do to be ready for ESG reporting?
Okay, so I think all businesses, regardless of the listed, non-listed, or whatever location, I think they just need to think about why do they want to report and who are they reporting to. I think that's a fundamental question. So why are they reporting? Are they doing it because of a need to respond to a regulatory requirement for a GRI report or a TCFD report or something? Because that directs the type of reporting you do and the quality of the report. Are they doing it because they don't have a regulatory requirement, but they're doing it for other reasons? Let's say they want to be competitive in the market, distinctive, because they simply think it's the best thing and important thing to do as a business. So coming up with that idea is very important as well. But whichever way you go, you ultimately do some form of stakeholder analysis, and you're looking sort of beyond the business. Well, actually, you look inside the business first, employees, senior management for their ideas, but you go beyond. You look at the consumer, you look at the visitors, you look at the finances, you look at general society and see what they're expecting of you. And that whole process of looking at what's required, seeing what the peers are doing in competition, and understanding your driver for it and stakeholders mean you come up with your key ESG material issues, and that's what you ultimately report. Now, once you've got those, you're then thinking, right, so how do I capture the data? Where is the data? And I mentioned a little bit earlier, do you get people who are not necessarily qualified to get data, to get it through? How do you clean it, scrub it, and make sure it's effective and appropriate for the market and accurate? And you're collecting the data, you're applying various methodologies and calculations for doing that from international standards. And then you're putting it together in a framework. Now, you might be told which framework you have to use by the regulation, GRI, TCFD or other, or simply might be aligning it to recommended practices. But either way, you're putting something out into the market, something out there for the stakeholders to see public. So it's got to be accurate. It's got to be good. It's got to mean something for you and them as well. So it's important the quality is right. And I would always encourage companies to think, if you're going to do this properly, do it yourself. Don't outsource it to someone else. Try and do it yourself, because you're creating a legacy team of reporting experts, sustainability experts. You can link into people like Ithaca, the general manager, and really understand what's the objective for this in the business itself. And that team may be affiliated or within the finance function, but nevertheless, you've got a core team driving forward initiatives, reporting and data, and able to deal with any challenges that come from external when you actually put the numbers out there. And then be very, very clear that it's information that some people are going to be used for very important decisions, such as making financial decisions, buying in on shares or raising capital. So the data has got to be really accurate, and that's very, very important to the whole game. Now, this whole thing is being uplifted by a new accounting standard coming in called IFRS. So if your business is using IFRS, and this is where the non-listed companies, the private companies may feel a push in the future. In 2 years' time or so, a new IFRS, which is effectively creating a whole new area of sustainability reporting at the same level of quality as expected financial data. So financial and non-financial will be on the same level and importance in the financial statements. And therefore, it's got to be really approached properly accurately with the right people doing it. So I think all industry, particularly hospitality, is going to be having to pick up whether they're doing it on the local, regional reasons or in the future because of the accounting systems actually used. Shall I leave it there?
Right. So certainly we need qualified resources in the company, in-house, that can work on the sustainability reporting. Do we have any further information, Damien, on the sustainability standards which are supposed to be released by the International Sustainability Standards Board?
Yeah, so what we've seen over the summer is 2 consulting documents came out, which are looking at the way of actually creating the governance and the overall disclosures, and then more specific disclosures. We Deloitte have responded to those, as many other companies have done, and they're now in the process of reviewing all this consultation. They expect to get a new draft out toward the end of the year or early next year, and that's going to be the basis on which further consultation will take place. I expect by the end of next year, we should see a finalised IFRS, which will then need to be adopted by local countries and then probably pushed forward the following year. Now, it sounds quite a way away, maybe 2 years, 2.5 years, but actually in reporting cycles, it's pretty soon. And actually for the development of an accounting standard, it's incredibly fast. Our existing accounting standards have taken 20, 30 years to develop. This is coming in within 2 years. So I think keep close to news, keep close to websites on how this is all developing. If you're in the accounting particular field itself, you'll be very aware of this. And I think it's very important just to be aware that it's coming in very, very quickly, and companies really need to start thinking at this stage, how are they going to respond to some form of ESG reporting that's going to impact them?
Right, brilliant. So with this, we conclude our webinar today. I have a few questions on the chat box, which I can take up with the panelists. So our first question is, perhaps Damien, you can answer that. How important is materiality in prioritizing SDGs?
Prioritize SDGs. It's always important. You'll be looking at the SDGs primarily to drive not necessarily your reporting, but your strategy as a business. SDGs are often used by companies to evaluate its impact or contribution to society. And therefore, if you're driving your business towards ESG under the SDGs, then understanding which are more material than others is very important. Now, the call on what is material comes down to yourself. Is it your impact externally? Could it be impact on yourselves? It could be what your biggest contribution as a business could actually be. So materiality is very important, SDGs and any other form of reporting as well.
Okay. Our next question is, who is most responsible to lead sustainability in a company? Perhaps Radhika or Iftikhar, either of you can take this up.
I'll wait to hear what the GM has to say.
I think that it comes from the leadership, Rabia, to tell you the truth. When I first was reading about the green, so I was considering green as a color. And the day I understand that it's not a color, it's really something different, it's not only a color. So the moment I accept this and I started working on it, you cannot imagine that, as Radhika said, that it takes maybe months. We started in January 2011, and by July we were able to divert actually 90% of our waste. The reason, because we involve each and every staff in our team. So if, for example, leader is not convinced, it cannot go down. So I started actually switching off, small actions, switching off my lights when I'm going outside. I started involving people, in a football, cricket, and so many events to build a team, because people were leaving to Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They said that maybe Ajman, there is no fun. As a matter of fact, our place become like a heaven and paradise because nobody wanted to leave. So it depends actually a leader, that how you take, and then how you are promoting your waiter to develop his career to a head of department, and not only one. So many people, they develop their career. So it becomes really a real paradise and a case study for so many companies, that how our company, they develop so many people, within the company. So it is actually started from the leader and it goes down, In my opinion, leader has to take, a lead in this case.
All right.
I just want to say that, it starts with the leader, Rabi. I just wanted to say it does start with the leader, but also just remember, sustainability is like a bug. once you actually understand it, once you know why you're doing it, it doesn't leave you. I mean, I'm here because it was a bug for me. And now I just think it's become my daily bread and butter now. So I think, yeah, take it on. Once you have a convincing leader who's got a story for you, I would challenge that anyone can do that. Yep.
All right, that's brilliant. That's a good message to end our webinar on, that sustainability is a bug. It doesn't leave you. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Our panelists, Damien, Iftikhar, and Radhika, for joining the session today, and all the attendees for attending the webinar. It was certainly a very insightful session. I learned a lot. Hope all of you did as well. In case you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly to me at info@atsaconsultants.com, and we'll be happy to get back with your inquiry. Thank you very much. We are signing off. Happy weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Ramin.
You too.
Bye.